Caitlin Roper. She is very well known in Australia for the incredible work that she does as part of the collective Shout team. She is the media manager, and together with Melinda and lots of other women, they're doing incredible campaigns. Now, Caitlin will talk to us about this book, how it came into being, how you managed to write this book and survive it. So thank you very much, Caitlin.
I've been a fan of Spinifex Press for more than a decade. Spinifex is Australia's leading independent feminist publisher. They've published the most amazing books by the best radical feminist writers. So I'm just going to start today just by reading the opening of the book, just a short extract, and then I'll go on in my comments. So this is the very beginning. She is seated, dressed in sheer black lingerie and knee-high stockings, her long, wavy hair falling over her face. The sounds of the crowd can be heard in the background, and men stand around waiting for their turn. A sign nearby reads, "Blowjob Robot, try it." It is a 2019 Adult Video News Expo, the annual trade show for the porn industry held in Las Vegas. Miss Doll Swallow, billed as the first oral sex robot in the world, is the feature in a live demonstration. A man holding a dildo approaches, sweeping her hair out of her face. With her head robotically bobbing up and down, he inserts the dildo in her mouth. "It can go faster," he tells onlookers. He turns back to the robot and says, "Go faster." The robot follows his instructions. "And it can go even faster," he boasts. The robot speeds up again, uttering the words, "Yes, master." Photos from the event show grinning men taking their turns, testing the robot with a dildo and posing for pictures. One man wearing a Pornhub t-shirt poses with his head back and eyes closed, feigning sexual pleasure, carefully positioning himself so it appears the robot is performing oral sex on him and not the dildo he is holding. Another image shows the female-bodied robot on the chair, with one man manipulating its body and another holding a dildo to its lips, and other men standing around watching. It looks eerily reminiscent of a gang rape scenario. The robot speaks every now and then, saying, "Come on, baby, here it is," and "Sex is fun, yes, master." The men are smiling and laughing. They are having a good time with this replica woman manufactured to sexually service men like them. Watching men bonding over replicating scenarios of violation and humiliation on this female-bodied robot, the inherent misogyny of sex dolls and robots is undeniable. She is not really a she, but an it. Sex dolls and robots are objects, but they are not neutral. They are an expression of woman-hating. These products could only be conceived of in a society in which women are seen as less than human, as things for men's sexual use and gratification. It's no coincidence that sex dolls and robots are overwhelmingly made in the likeness of women for men's sexual use, rather than the other way around. And that's that. I wrote Sex Dolls, Robots and Woman Hating to expose the inherent misogyny in the global trade in female-bodied sex dolls and robots for men's sexual use, and as a warning of the real-world harms to women and girls, which I'll outline today. It seems that outside of feminist circles, there's a bit of a narrative that sex dolls, while maybe a little bit weird or creepy, are kind of neutral and harmless, or that it's a case of men who are lonely owning a silicone doll. And how could anyone object to what a few individual men are doing in the privacy of their own homes? Or how is anyone else even impacted by it? But sex dolls and robots represent the literal objectification of women. They are premised on our objectification and dehumanization. They are objects to be used in place of women, embodied representations of women designed purely for men's sexual gratification, manufactured for the express purpose of being sexually used. They function as pornified replica women that are always sexually available. The belief that women are objects, or interchangeable with objects, or that we exist to be sexually used by men, harms women as a whole. Sex dolls and robots made in the female form, which they typically are, legitimize and entrench the sexual objectification of women, reinforcing women's less than human status and the belief that women exist for men's sexual use. The sexual objectification of women serves as the foundation of men's violence against women in all its forms. It all begins with objectification. Despite this, advocates in academia, who are mostly men, no one's really surprised, claim that the development of sex dolls and robots should be actively encouraged, and that they could have many benefits, just not for women. Their proposals for how sex robot technology could be utilised are really just ludicrous. Advocates claim that sex dolls and robots could provide companionship and comfort to people, at least the kind with penises. They could ease loneliness. They could alleviate grief over the death of an intimate partner, because a sex robot could be made in the likeness of the dead spouse. Young people, males, could learn to navigate sexual consent by penetrating a lifeless female-shaped object, because you can't argue with that logic, right? Advocates argue sex robots could be made available to those men who are elderly, disabled, who suffer from social anxiety, those who wish to practice violent, sadistic, illegal and pedophilic sex acts. Some advocates even go as far as to argue that if men don't have access to on-demand sexual access to women's bodies or replica women's bodies, that they are suffering from sexual deprivation. There's legitimate arguments that are being made, and others argue that intimate relationships could be strengthened if the male partner has access to a sex robot. Funnily enough, this was not the experience of the women whose partners purchased sex dolls in the accounts I included in the book. Sex doll and robot advocates, both inside and outside of academia, failed to consider how these pornographic dolls and robots modelled on the bodies of women and girls might harm women and girls. They neglect to examine how female-bodied sex dolls and robots reinforce and further entrench attitudes of sexism, how they diminish women's humanity, or encourage men's sexual entitlement to women's bodies. Because we need more of that, don't we? More entitlement to women's bodies. They don't consider how sex dolls could function as a form of sexual harassment, as men impose their sexual fetish on women in both public and private, which I document in the book. How women are being harmed by their partner's sex doll use, or violated by sex dolls made in their likeness without their knowledge or consent. They fail to contemplate how replica women's sex dolls that are endlessly available for men's unlimited use could contribute to rape culture or men's violence against women. They appear to be more concerned with men's orgasms than the very real harms to women and girls, which I document in the book. I explore how the production and use of female-bodied sex dolls and robots encourages and contributes to male violence against women. As I've touched on before, sexual objectification is at the root of men's violence against women in all its forms. And if women are seen as things, as objects, rather than fully human, then it becomes easier to justify our abuse and mistreatment. We can't address an epidemic of male violence against women without challenging the routine, everyday sexual objectification of women. Sex dolls and robots made in the female form reinforce women's object status, the belief that women are less than human, or that we exist for men's sexual gratification. So essentially they're in direct opposition to efforts to fight men's violence against women. They undermine our work to end male violence and to advance the status of women globally. I expose how men's access to female-bodied sex dolls and robots facilitates and encourages violence more directly, with some doll owners using their dolls for violence. Some men performed acts of sexualized violence, BDSM, and torture on their dolls, which they document through pornographic photos and videos that they upload to online forums and websites dedicated to sex doll porn. These men tied up their dolls. They acted out detailed scenarios of sex slavery and predation on their dolls. Some men broke their dolls through rough use. Others said they used their dolls as practice for sexual relations with women. Doll owners relate to their dolls as though they were women. They do to the dolls what they want to do to women. A couple of months ago, what appeared to be a dead body washed up on the shore of a Thailand beach turned out to be a discarded headless sex doll. In recent years, there have been a growing number of cases where abandoned sex dolls are initially mistaken for dead women and girls. Prior to being dumped, some of these dolls appear to have been subjected to extreme violence. They're headless, they're mutilated and ripped apart. Defenders of sex dolls and robots argue that there's no harm in men's violence against a doll, as there is no victim, or even that they could function as a cathartic outlet for men and prevent men's violence against women. But providing replica women for men to enact violence doesn't prevent violence. It is violence in and of itself. The violence isn't simulated, it's not a fantasy, it's real. And men are enacting this violence on a silicone body that looks and feels like a real woman. They're having the experience of perpetrating violence against a woman, one that provides no emotional feedback, which is reinforced by an orgasm and encouraged by other forum members. Having access to replica women to practice rape, violence and abuse doesn't prevent men's violence against women. It's just an extension of it. Women and girls are also directly harmed by men's use of sex dolls. In the book, I share the accounts of women whose male partners purchased a sex doll and their feelings of inadequacy and humiliation and distress as a result. These women couldn't keep up with their partner's sexual demands and felt they couldn't compete with a perfect, compliant, pornographic doll. Many of these women felt powerless to object to their partner's sex doll. They described their heartbreak and devastation and feeling as though they were being cheated on, but also dismissed their legitimate objections. They believed if they weren't constantly sexually available to their husbands, then they couldn't object. These women had also been groomed by the wider culture to tolerate their partner's sex doll use. Some of them even prefaced their concerns by insisting that they weren't kink shaming and that they were very open-minded sexually. The concept of kink and kink shaming and the expectation that women should tolerate any and all of their partner's sexual desires or be branded vanilla or prudish served to silence these women. Ultimately, the men's sexual preferences were rendered more important than the women's dignity or suffering. Sex dolls are also being made in the likeness of specific women without their knowledge or consent. Most sex doll manufacturers allow users to select the physical features of their dolls. They can choose things like hair and eye colour, body type, skin colour, breast size, all those things, or right down to freckles and the kind of manicure they want. So all of those things can be customised and selected. But some make dolls modelled on actual women based on a customer-supplied photo. One woman learned of the sex doll made in her likeness and given her name after the manufacturer posted a link to her Instagram account identifying her. Another learned about a sex doll made in her likeness after the man who created it sent her a message on Instagram, complete with photos, describing just how much he enjoyed using it. Doll manufacturers report receiving requests from male customers for dolls made in the likeness of women known to them, their mate's girlfriend, their next-door neighbour, or a woman they have a crush on. Some men claim to have had sex dolls customised in the likeness of specific women. And just saying here, I didn't actually put this... Maybe I did put it in the book. Renata, maybe you remember. Greta Thunberg?
I think so.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So there was, on an online forum, there was a picture of a sex robot made to look like Greta Thunberg. And the guy described all the phrases he was going to make her say that were intended to degrade and humiliate her. And of course, everyone else jumps in and gets involved, and they're all enjoying this violation of this girl who did not consent to this, did not participate in this. I'm not sure that this is actually real. I'm not sure that the photo that it is a real doll, but you can see the potential here. And you can see that even if it's not the potential for the degradation, abuse of women and the humiliation, that kind of sexual harassment is ever present with these products. I also devote 2 chapters to the trade in child sex abuse dolls. And these are dolls modelled on the bodies of little girls, toddlers, and even infants, all marketed for men's sexual use. I've witnessed child sex abuse dolls in the likeness of toddlers with dummies or pacifiers in their mouth, dolls that appear to be crying or distressed, dolls that are photographed in defensive poses with their hands up like this, protecting their face, and even childlike dolls that appear to be sleeping or unconscious. I respond to claims from the pedophile rights activists that these replica children with penetrable orifices are sex toys like any other, or fantasy sexual outlets. As I argue in the book, their childlike appearance isn't a coincidence. It's the very point. That's why they want them. These products are intentionally designed to look and feel like a real child, to facilitate the embodied fantasy experience of raping a little girl. Pedophiles and their supporters claim that providing them with access to replica little girls, toddlers and babies to enact their fantasies of child rape could prevent their sexual abuse of children, but there's no evidence for this. The notion that encouraging sexual offenders endorsing their sexual use and abuse of replica girls, and legitimising girls as appropriate objects of male sexual desire will somehow protect girls from sexual abuse is nonsensical. Normalising and legitimising men's sexual use and abuse of girls doesn't prevent abuse, it just allows them to practice. The strongest argument against this claim that child sex abuse dolls could prevent men abusing children comes from doll owners themselves. I've documented media reports for a couple of years now, and what I found is that despite owning a child sex abuse doll, the vast majority of these men still sexually offend against children. These men are typically found in possession of child sexual abuse material, a record of the rape, abuse, and torture of children. Some were contact offending against children. Some were secretly filming children. Some created and distributed child sexual abuse material. Owning a child sex abuse doll did not prevent these men from sexually abusing and exploiting children. Why would we believe it would? The reality is it's not as simple as a doll or a child. Some men even incorporated actual children into their sex doll use. Some expressed their intention to act out fantasies of raping girls known to them, even girls in their care, using a doll. And there's been some reported news stories documenting this. A South Australian man was found with 5 child sex abuse dolls. One of these was dressed in girls' clothing and had a sex toy built into it, and a laminated photo of a real child's face attached to the head. A Victorian primary school teacher filmed himself having intercourse with a child sex abuse doll in a school uniform with masks made from school photos of his students. He was also contact offending against his students. Some doll manufacturers offer to customise them in the likeness of specific children. And what this means is that a man can send in photos of a real child and a doll complete with penetrable vagina, mouth and anus will be made in their likeness. And there have been a number of documented cases where child sex abuse dolls have been modelled on actual girls. Ultimately, child sex abuse dolls don't prevent child sexual abuse. They just provide more ways for pedophiles to violate and sexually exploit children, even without necessarily having access to them. After all that rainbows and sunshine, I do conclude the book with a little bit of hope. My final chapter is about resistance. It's about the women who are speaking out against this industry, about their vital work and their victories. The campaign against porn robots in the UK, Collect a Shout in Australia, the National Centre on Sexual Exploitation, or NCOSE, in the US, and the Feminist Academy of Technology and Ethics, which is international. I've written about their activism, about successful campaigns to get child sex abuse dolls pulled from major online global platforms like Amazon, Wish, Alibaba, Made in China, and Collect a Shout. We have an ongoing campaign against Etsy because they still have ignored us. It's been a year we've been campaigning to get these products off their platform, and they have still not acknowledged us. But we should all be encouraged by the victories that we have had. I wanted to expose the misogyny of this industry and how women and girls are already being harmed by it. But more than that, I hope to inspire readers to action. I want people to come away feeling more educated on the issue and equipped to speak out and to challenge the trade in sex dolls and robots, whether that is lobbying government for new laws, calling on online platforms to stop selling these products, or even just challenging this narrative that sex dolls and robots are neutral or harmless, or that they could prevent abuse. At Collect a Shout, we are trying to get going a global campaign to get uniform laws criminalising child sex abuse dolls around the world. So if you're representing an organisation that would be interested in partnering on that project, or if you'd like to be involved in some way, please either come up and chat with us after or get in touch on Hoover or whatever, but we'd love to hear from you. And I think I've actually set up a discussion group for strategising, but it's been bumped way down because everything else is on top of it. So I'll leave my comments there, but thank you so much for your support. It really means a lot to me, and I look forward to our joint efforts in challenging the trade in sex dolls and robots.
Thank you very much, Caitlin. That was a really thorough, good overview over this horrible new phenomenon. Now, a couple of questions that I have for you before we go to questions from the audience. Would you please say something about the sex doll brothels?
Sure.
And the second thing, which is still with me from reading Caitlin's book, or editing Caitlin's book, is that this whole notion that, when a man is married and the woman doesn't want to have so much sex with him, and he convinces her that a sex doll will spice up their marriage, and in some instances he makes the sex doll sleep between him and his wife. So can you imagine this poor woman has to now live with this presence of a sex doll that he closes, he calls it, it's an it, but he of course gives her a female name, as Caitlin said, and it sleeps in the middle of the bed. I mean, that's just an image that I find really distressing for the woman. So the sex dolls. The other thing maybe, what's the difference between sex dolls and sex robots?
Sure, maybe I'll start with that because that's probably a good place to start.
Yeah.
So sex dolls, they are lifelike, anatomically correct silicone dolls that are typically made in the female form. There are some male-bodied ones, but I mean, there's not the demand for them. They're for the female-bodied dolls. And even when there is a demand for those, it's still by men. So yeah, that's what the sex dolls are, and they come with penetrable orifices. We don't really have sex robots in the way that a lot of people might think. People have this kind of sci-fi idea of what a sex robot would be like. But what we have now is basically a sex doll body and an animatronic head that it's paired with. And you can kind of hook it up to your smartphone, so you can have an app on your smartphone and it can talk to you and things like that. Some do things like blink, or there's some that have sort of a few robotic movements that they can make, like just very limited. But they can't even stand up by themselves. They can't walk around or anything like that. So yeah, when people talk about sex robots and all these ideas, like, oh, we could do this, people marry them and they'll fall in love, and we can end sex trafficking with sex robot. Like, we're really talking about like a dummy. And so all these far-fetched ideas are not incredibly plausible, really. So that's sex dolls and robots. In terms of the brothels, what I found as I was researching, looking on these online forums where sex doll owners were discussing together their dolls and what they did and all of that, what struck me was the parallels between the sex doll owners and sex buyers in terms of the reasons that they found sex dolls appealing. They liked there was no drama, as they put it. They liked that they're always sexually available, that it's all about them, the sex is all about them and what they want. They, the dominance and not having to consider another person, not having to consider their needs or feelings or pain or discomfort, any of those things. And a lot of them had multiple dolls as well. So it was very much these clear parallels between sex doll owners and sex buyers. And there are some academics, male academics, who have argued that these products should be made available to men, and that because they're a bit pricey, maybe they can start by renting them out, and then we have a few sex doll brothels around the world. And again, these are dominated by female body dolls. Every now and then you'll find one that has a token male doll, but again, still used for men, still under the category gay. So and these brothels, like I said, different countries around the world where men can come in and rent a sex doll, and it's very much promoted as fulfill all your wildest fantasies, do whatever you want, sex without limits. So men get to come and have this experience of a replica woman that they can use in any way that they want. And they're actually, most of the sex doll brothels that I have encountered, when I've looked at them and found media from years ago or Facebook pages or whatever, a lot of them don't seem to be active anymore. So I suspect it's actually not, just because there's so much turnover, there's so much damage to the dolls, and it's actually quite expensive to keep them going. So I suspect that's why a lot of them do sort of disappear or shut down. There was one regular brothel where they got a sex doll as well, and news media reported that it was more popular than the women. And they were actually charging more for the doll.
Thank you, Caitlin. Yeah, that got to me too. And the other sentence that some men say, oh, so much better than real women. They don't want to get presents for their birthday. They don't need to go shopping, and I have to go with them. It's so boring.
Never gets its period.
They don't get period. So it's just, I mean, really, we can just be, as women, we can just be replaced. It's just really easy.
Do you know the countries that are the most, where the most purchases are made? Like, say, the top 4-5 countries?
That's a good question. I'm not sure about where the most purchases are made. They're mainly coming out of China and Japan, but there's also a really big manufacturer in the US which is probably one of the more well-known ones. So I can't say exactly where they're being purchased, but yeah, they're, like I said, mainly China and Japan they're being made.
And they cost about $3,000 to $5,000, don't they?
Yeah, they're very expensive. Well, it depends. They are. You can get sort of less quality ones, but if you want sort of a more lifelike, realistic-looking one, you're looking at about $6,000 before any extras, before any sort of robotic element, just for a doll. I have come across men in these online forums for sex dolls talking about how they would like to make porn videos of them using their sex dolls and then sort of superimpose the face of a certain celebrity or a certain woman, so they're making porn of her even though she's not there. So there's a few manufacturers that I've referenced in the book just talking about the ways that they advise people to get around these laws. So one of the things they do is they say, get the doll with big fake breasts that can be removed later so it doesn't look like a child, or ship the head separately to the body, or even that you can get the doll without penetrable orifices, and they say we'll make a tutorial and show you how to make it yourself.
Oh, great.
So they go to great lengths, or you can get this little storage thing and it looks like you're just buying a small couch, but inside there's a childlike doll. So, or other ways are like, we've got people here and here, so if you don't want to try and get it through customs, come to our warehouse here instead of getting it sent. Have it sent to the next state and have a storeroom where you keep it, like a storage room. So there's, really extreme. There was actually one of these guys is setting up what he called an African paradise, and he's trying to kind of put together this package where pedophiles who want to have child sex abuse dolls and be able to purchase them can go to Africa and start a new life. And he's like, and I'll help you, I'll get the dolls in for you. What I hear from a lot of the academics on the other side of this debate, they'll say, maybe they make men less violent, or we just don't have the research. But we do have the research showing, what happens when women are objectified. We know the harms. We've had decades of empirical evidence showcasing the harms to women and girls. Things like, how it hurts them personally, like the body image, the body dissatisfaction, how other people perceive them, the greater support for sexist beliefs and for rape myths, and greater support of sexual violence. And so we know that objectification is already linked to men's violence. And we also know that men's sexual entitlement is a big part of male violence against women. So we already know these things. This is not new. So the idea that we have these dolls that are basically objects, well, they are objects, replica women objects, that allow men to use them for sexual use whenever they want. And everyone's saying, they could be good, there's all these benefits. It's like, wait a minute, let's go back and just talk about what we already know, that these will be harmful to women. We already have this research.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
I've had a little bit of mainstream media attention, particularly around the child sex abuse dolls issue. I think that's kind of the thing that's shocking. Well, it's all shocking. So there's been that. There's been a little bit just more generally, but most of the media I've had so far is probably within the feminist community. So I think most people that I've spoken to, like in the media, they're somewhat on board already. They may not know, the feminist arguments and all that, but they are on board enough to know this is probably not great for women. It's probably, linked to men's violence against women or to child sexual abuse. But we'll see how it goes.
It's mostly the child sexual abuse, I think.
That's what gets attention.
That's sort of like, oh my God, that's what they're doing to children.
There's some academics who have sort of suggested this, like maybe we just need to have it so it will, model consent and, all those things, affirmative consent. And there was actually a crowdfunder a couple of years ago. This woman wanted to set up the world's first consent-focused sex doll brothel. It didn't happen. But basically, the plan for it was that the man would have to come in and spend 30 minutes of FaceTime with the doll or the robot, and then he could go ahead. So it's like, see, you have to put in the work first. And I'm like, how is this consent? It's like you tick the box and you can do whatever you want. Like, how is this modelling anything that's different? And I guess the other thing, just to your comment about if the doll is saying no or saying that hurts or that's rape, there's going to be a market for that. There's going to be men who are like, yes, I want a rape doll. It's really complicated.
How did you cope researching and writing this, especially going to conventions like those?
Well, I ate a lot of chocolate. And I'm really lucky, maybe unlike other people. I had, the great collective shout team, so I'm constantly we're all on WhatsApp chatting and debriefing. So I could, when I was seeing things, I could go and just be like, and I could vent and know that it was a safe space and that the other women are totally behind me, they get it. So really having that support and that space where you can talk and debrief with other women, other feminist women, has been crucial for me. But the other thing is, a lot of what I've come across has made me really angry. So I guess people have different approaches, and sometimes I do feel really awful about it. But for me, the dominant emotion has been anger. And that's been good because I've been able to channel that. Because I'm like, okay, well, I'm enraged and I'm going to write a book. Or I'm going to expose what's happening and I'm going to call it out. And there was some... Has anyone seen that GIF of Angry Kermit typing? That was how I wrote the book. But that's what it was like. I'd come across something, you know, from like a male academic saying something like, oh, this could actually be really good thing. Or... You know, when there's desire discrepancy, the wife doesn't want to have sex as much as the husband. This is a good thing and will strengthen marriages. I was like, fucking. And I would just be as sarcastic as I could, and just, I don't know, so there was some satisfaction in like, I'm challenging this. I'm not just sitting here like this is happening to me or something. It's like, I'm going to use this rage and I'm going to call it out and I'm going to make sure everyone knows that what is happening.